Aita, for letting my wife think she get half only to reveal the house isn't mine. I'm 36 years old. I'm a civil engineer and I've worked in construction since I finished college. I'm a pretty calm person. I've always been logical and pragmatic. And I think that's helped me stay calm in the midst of the storm. My story is something that seems taken from a movie or a bad novel, but it's so real that it hurts. I was married for 5 years to my now ex-wife, whom we'll simply call her. I refuse to use her name because honestly she doesn't deserve it. We didn't have children, which now seems like a small consolation. Our relationship started like any other, full of love, laughter, and shared dreams. We met through friends at a party in Austin, Texas. She worked as a freelance photographer. I was at a mid-sized construction company, nothing spectacular, but enough to live comfortably. After a couple of years of dating, we got married in a simple ceremony. We both had jobs we liked, but a year after we got married she decided she wanted to quit photography and dedicate herself to discovering her passion. I didn't think much of it at the time because even though we weren't millionaires, my income was enough to cover both our expenses. I saw it as something temporary. I believed in her promise that she would go back to work as soon as she found what she really wanted to do. Months passed. Although she was still aimless, our life remained peaceful. We bought a modest house on the outskirts of Austin with a small mortgage. I thought it was our house. I would soon discover that things weren't what they seemed. The first signs that something was wrong started around the 3rd year of marriage. She started going out more often, saying she needed to clear her head and find inspiration. She started going to the gym regularly, which at first seemed fine to me. I even bought her new clothes and encouraged her to take care of her mental and physical health. It wasn't unusual for her to come home late, but I attributed it to her exercise routine and outings with friends. I thought everything was fine. Here's what opened my eyes: a hotel receipt I found folded in the pocket of her jacket. I remember it was a Sunday morning. She was still asleep. For some reason I decided to pick up the clothes she had left on the floor after going out the night before. When I pulled out the receipt I felt like the world was slipping away from me. The receipt showed a room at an expensive hotel downtown. The date coincided with one of the nights when, according to her, she had gone out with friends. I didn't say anything at first, not because I didn't want to confront her, because I felt I needed to be prepared. My pragmatic nature took over. I needed proof. I needed clear answers before I lost my mind. So I started watching her closely. I became like a silent detective, paying attention to every little detail. That's when I noticed her phone. Before she'd leave it around without worrying, but now she carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I jokingly asked her if she had something to hide, she laughed and called me paranoid. The seed was already planted. One day, while she was in the shower, phone vibrated on the nightstand. I didn't think much of it and looked at the screen. The message said, "See you tonight, beautiful, can't wait." And the sender was simply see. My stomach churned. I knew what I feared was real. Couldn't contain myself any longer. When she came out of the bathroom, I showed her the message and asked her directly who was C. At first, she denied everything, saying that he was a friend from the gym, that it didn't mean anything, that I was taking things out of context. But when I demanded explanations about the hotel and her outings, everything came to life. She was having an affair with her gym trainer. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal, but how she reacted. She didn't show an ounce of remorse. Instead of apologizing or trying to fix things, she looked me in the eye and said, "I want to divorce." As if that wasn't enough, she continued, "And I want half of everything we have, the house, the accounts, the car, everything." I was speechless. The audacity and coldness with which she said it left me frozen. But what she didn't know is that the situation wasn't as simple as she thought. You see, my father, a man who has always had an almost prophetic instinct to protect what matters, convinced me years ago to put the house and my savings in his name. He told me it's a way to protect yourself if something ever goes wrong. You never know what can happen in life. Son, better to be prepared. At the time I didn't think much of his advice. But now more than ever I'm grateful for his wisdom. She thought she would take half of everything. The reality was very different. Everything she believed belonged to me actually wasn't mine. That night after the fight I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had completely changed in a matter of hours. The woman I had shared years of my life with whom I had dreamed of having a family, now looked at me as if I were the enemy. And the worst part was that she didn't even feel bad. The next day I decided to take action, called my dad and told him everything that had happened. He wasn't as surprised as I thought he'd be. My father was always a very practical and direct man. The first thing he said to me was, "I warned you, son. You never really know who you're marrying until everything goes south." I felt like an idiot for not having seen the signs before, but at the same time I was grateful to have followed his advice to put my assets in his name. My dad always was calm. He told me not to worry, that legally the house, the accounts and everything important was protected. However, he warned me to be careful. Desperate people are unpredictable. He said during the following days she started acting as if nothing had happened. She was still in the house using my things, sleeping in our bed, as if I didn't know about her affair. That was what hurt me the most. How could someone be so cold and calculating? The only thing that kept me sane was the idea that I had an advantage. Unlike her, I knew how things worked in the legal and financial realm. Thanks to my father and my profession. That's when I suggested that if she really wanted a divorce, we could settle it amicably and without lawyers, not because I wanted to be nice, because I wanted to see how far her greed would go. Her response was predictable. I want half of everything. I'm not leaving this relationship without what I'm entitled to. She said it with a confidence that almost made me laugh. She had no idea what was about to happen. Here's the interesting thing. Although we lived in the house, I wasn't the legal owner. I paid the mortgage and expenses, but everything was in my father's name. Title deed had been registered in his name from the beginning. That meant that in legal terms, she couldn't claim a penny of the house. The next day I contacted a lawyer who had worked with my family for years. The first thing I did was give him all the documentation, the house contract, bank records, and the agreement I had made with my father. Everything was perfectly in order. I explained my situation and told him that my priority was to get out of this divorce with as little drama as possible. Meanwhile, she started making her moves. She started talking to friends and family about the divorce, painting me as the villain of the story. According to her, I had emotionally abandoned her and didn't give her the support she needed to follow her dreams. When I heard this, I couldn't help but laugh. Follow her dreams. What dreams was she referring to? Going out with her trainer while I worked to pay our bills. The worst came when I realized she was starting to prepare legally. I found a folder on her desk that contained information about divorce lawyers in Austin. Among the papers were handwritten notes about our assets. She was sure she was entitled to the house and half my savings. Instead of losing my cool, I decided to prepare. I started documenting everything. I saved text messages, emails, and even photos of her and her trainer that I found on her social media. Yes, I know it's a little shady to go through her things, but when someone is willing to lie to your face, you have to protect yourself. The next thing I did was talk to my dad again. He, with his usual calmness, told me, let her think what she wants. In the end, the truth will come out. We decided not to tell her anything yet. We would let her continue believing that she was about to get a fortune from this divorce. Meanwhile, I continued with the legal preparations. What I didn't expect was how quickly her attitude would change barely a week after the initial confrontation. She started to get aggressive. Her yelling was constant. She spent hours accusing me of stealing her life and not valuing her enough. She started sleeping in the guest room and avoided talking to me, except to insult me or make sarcastic comments. One day, while I was checking my computer in the living room, she came over and said, "What, after I get the house and everything that belongs to me, you're going to be alone working until the day you die?" At that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I was no longer dealing with the woman I once fell in love with. I was dealing with someone who was willing to destroy me, if it meant she could get her way. What she didn't know was that the game board was tilted in my favor. After that biting comment where she predicted a life of solitary work for me, something changed in me. I wasn't hurt anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I just wanted to end this as quickly and cleanly as possible. While she thought she had beaten me emotionally, I continued with my plan. The next day she arrived home with a triumphant air as if she were walking towards victory. She casually told me that she had hired a shark lawyer in Austin, who had assured her that she would get half of everything we had. Plus alimony. Couldn't help but let out a small smile. "Good that you resolved it so quickly. It will be interesting to see how this develops," I replied as neutrally as possible. Her reaction was one of confusion. She didn't know that I had already hired my own lawyer, nor that he and I already had everything in order. I continued playing my role of bewildered and defeated man, letting her think she had all the power in her hands. The day of our first formal meeting with the lawyers arrived. We met in a mediator's office. She walked in with her lawyer, a guy in an expensive suit with the typical, "I'm smarter than all of you" expression. I sat on the other side of the table next to my lawyer, an older man, calm with a wise look, and not much to prove. The session started with the usual discussions about the division of property, general questions, blah. That's when her lawyer dropped his first bomb, believing he had an ace up his sleeve. "Our position is simple. My client wants half the house, half the savings accounts, and the vehicle registered in your name." My lawyer raised an eyebrow, pulled out a yellow folder, calmly slid it across the table. "With all due respect, the house in question does not belong to my client. It has been legally registered in his father's name for years." As you can see here, the silence in the room was deafening. Her lawyer flipped through the documents quickly, his lips pursed. For the first time since this all began, I saw a flicker of doubt on my ex-wife's face. She looked as if she had just been punched in the stomach. "What is this?" she muttered, turning towards me. "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied calmly. What followed was predictable. A desperate attempt to invalidate what she had just seen. Her lawyer started asking when the house had been transferred, if there was any kind of fraud or illegal movement. My lawyer, with the patience of a saint, answered everything with evidence and documents. The house was registered in my father's name from the time of purchase. I simply lived there and paid the expenses as a de facto tenant. All the records were in order, and there wasn't a single illegality. My ex-wife stood up abruptly, clearly furious. This can't be real. We live there together. I've put years of my life into that house. Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but it was too late. She lost all composure in front of everyone, making clear her true nature. A person accustomed to getting what she wanted, no matter how the mediation was a disaster for her. As they reviewed the accounts and other assets, it became clear that I didn't have much to offer. Most of the savings were in a joint account with my father in the car, although in my name. Wasn't worth enough to be a significant price as we left the meeting. She gave me a murderous look. You're a liar and a manipulator. You're going to pay for this. But in reality, all I had done was be prudent. The next thing that happened was predictable. She started looking for other ways to attack me since she couldn't get what she wanted legally. She began a smear campaign on social media and with mutual friends. She painted me as a financial abuser, someone who had left her with nothing after years of sacrifices. In her post, she said things like, "Be careful who you marry. Some men are experts at hiding everything to leave you with nothing." At first I was worried, I won't lie. Then I remembered what my lawyer told me. People who shout the loudest are usually the ones who lie the most. Anyway, the truth always comes out. Close friends started distancing themselves from her when they found out about her affair with the trainer. Apparently her shark lawyer wasn't so understanding once he learned there was no money to be made. A mutual friend told me that she had been seen at the gym fighting with her trainer. Apparently their great love was also falling apart. He yelled at her that she had left him alone, and that all of this was her fault. My friend told me between laughs and sighed. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pity and satisfaction. She had destroyed everything on a whim, and now she was paying the consequences. This wasn't over yet, because in her desperation she decided to take the case to court, convinced that she could prove that I had committed fraud. She had no evidence, no arguments, but she had an ego too big to accept defeat. The day of the trial arrived. To be honest, I had never been so nervous in my life, but I tried to stay calm. My lawyer, with that serenity that made me trust him, gave me one last pat on the shoulder before entering the courtroom. Remember, emotions don't win trials, facts do. Meanwhile, my ex-wife was at the other end of the room with her lawyer, looking at me as if I were the villain in her story. She walked in with an air of confidence that made me raise an eyebrow. What did she think she was going to achieve? My lawyer had prepared me for anything from false accusations to desperate attempts to unearth something non-existent. He entered, we all stood, and then the show began. Her lawyer started strong, painting a melodramatic picture. She, a poor wife who had sacrificed her career to support me only to be financially betrayed by a calculating husband. They said it with such seriousness that they almost convinced me, but then it was my ex-wife's turn to speak. She took the stand and began her testimony with fake tears and a trembling voice. She claimed that I had manipulated her for years, making her believe that we were a team while secretly diverting all our assets to hidden accounts and putting them in my father's name. She spoke as if she were a financial expert, mentioning legal terms that she clearly didn't understand. And for a moment even the judge seemed confused. But here's where it all started to fall apart. First, the inconsistencies. My lawyer stood up with a folder full of documents and began to dismantle her arguments piece by piece. The house, for example, was legally registered in my father's name from the beginning of the purchase, years before she and I got married. Did you know that this property never belonged to my client? Not exactly, but second, the savings. My ex-wife claimed that I had hidden money in secret accounts, but my lawyer presented all the bank records, making it clear that the main money was in a joint account with my father, and the rest barely covered basic expenses. Can you explain then why these accounts were opened before your marriage? The silence in the room was delicious. My ex-wife tried to compose herself, but it was clear that her narrative didn't add up. When it was my turn, we made sure to drop the real bomb, the evidence of her affair. My lawyer presented the text messages and photos that she herself had uploaded on her social media with her trainer. It wasn't necessary to emphasize much, the evidence spoke for itself. My ex-wife's lawyer tried to object, saying that her personal relationship wasn't relevant. The judge didn't see it that way. Apparently infidelity did matter in this context, because she had painted a picture where I was the villain, and she was the suffering victim. When the photos and messages appeared on the screen, my ex-wife turned red as a tomato. She couldn't even look me in the eye for a moment. I even felt some pity for her. My father was called to testify, and as always he did so with impressive calmness. He explained why he had decided to register the house and the accounts and his name from the beginning. I gave this advice to my son because I wanted to protect him. You never know what life may bring. It's not about distrusting people, but about being cautious. The judge nodded several times during his testimony. It was difficult to argue against the fact that everything had been done years before the marriage and completely legally. My ex-wife's lawyer tried one last desperate tactic. He insinuated that my father and I had conspired to hide assets, but my father, without losing his composure, simply replied, "Everything we've done is documented. There are no conspiracies here." After days of testimony and legal arguments, the judge finally gave his decision. The house remained my father's. She had no right to claim it. The savings accounts were untouchable. She couldn't access funds that never belonged to her. The only thing she got was a minimal amount of alimony for 6 months, barely enough to cover some of her legal expenses. The judge also noted that her infidelity and lack of contribution to the household had been important factors in his decision. When the judge finished reading the verdict, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked at my ex-wife waiting for some reaction. But I only saw a mixture of rage and humiliation. She got up from her seat muttering things that no one could understand and left the courtroom without looking back outside the courthouse. My lawyer shook my hand and said, "You did well. The truth always wins even if it takes time." My friends and family sent me messages of support when they heard about the outcome. Meanwhile, she disappeared from our lives completely. I heard rumors that she had tried to appeal, but without money or evidence, her attempt went nowhere. Her gym trainer also ended up distancing himself from her. Apparently all the negative attention had damaged his reputation and his clients started to abandon him. I wasn't happy about her misfortune, but I couldn't help but think they had brought it upon themselves. I left the courthouse with the feeling of having won much more than a trial. I had won my freedom. The battle had been long, exhausting, and at many times surreal, but the verdict made it clear to me that sometimes justice does what it has to do. And the truth, however uncomfortable, always has the power to bring down any lie. In the days that followed the trial, my life began to change little by little. For the last few months, I had been surviving in automatic mode, focusing solely on protecting my assets and proving my innocence. But with the divorce finally settled, I could start breathing again. Ex-wife didn't accept defeat gracefully. The last time I saw her was right after the trial, when she stormed out of the courtroom. Mutual friends told me that she tried to talk to several of them, seeking support and telling even more twisted versions of the story. For her, I was still the villain who had ruined her. However, most people already knew the truth. The matter of the gym trainer wasn't a secret, and when the evidence came to light at the trial, her reputation was shattered. Her trainer, by the way, left her shortly afterwards. Apparently didn't want to be involved in the legal mess she had created. He lost clients, lost his job at the gym, and disappeared from the scene. My ex-wife, meanwhile, moved back in with her parents. Her new life never arrived. And from what I heard later, she was still jumping from one temporary job to another, unable to find stability. Was it divine justice? I don't know. But I realized something important. People who build their lives on lies and selfishness, sooner or later, crumble. For my part, I decided to focus on rebuilding my life. During the divorce process, I had realized that I had sacrificed more than money or time. I had lost the ability to enjoy my day-to-day life. My routine was reduced to working and worrying about what she would do next. That was over. I reconnected with myself. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and doing things I enjoyed but had abandoned. I discovered a hiking group in Austin and started spending my weekends exploring national parks and trails I had never known. It turns out that being alone in nature, away from the chaos of the city, was the therapy I needed. I got back on track with my personal finances. My father and I sat down to review all the numbers after the divorce. Although it had been a difficult financial arrangement, he helped me set up, left me in a solid position. I started saving aggressively, resumed investments, put everything in order to make sure I would never be vulnerable in a similar situation again. I learned to trust again carefully. I'm not going to lie, the divorce left a deep emotional wound for a while. The idea of trusting someone again seemed impossible to me. But as the months went by, I realized that I couldn't blame everyone for the mistakes of one person. I started to open up little by little, meeting new people without expectations, simply enjoying the moment. A year after the trial, something interesting happened. I met someone while attending an event organized by my company. It was an engineering conference in Houston. There I met a woman named Laura. Unlike my ex, she was hardworking, straightforward, and had infectious energy. We spent hours talking about our lives, our goals, and even the silliest things like 90 seconds movies and bands neither of us had gotten over. The funny thing is that at first I wasn't looking for anything serious, but Laura was different. She understood the value of effort and wasn't afraid to say things as they are. Over time, we started going out and sharing more moments together. Best of all, I never felt the need to hide what I had lived through. I told her my story from the beginning, how I had gone through one of the most difficult times of my life and what I learned from all of it. Laura not only understood, but admired me for how I had handled the situation. She made me realize that difficult experiences don't define us, they do transform us. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the next story.